What if I told you that 600,000 women undergo hysterectomies every year in the United States, and 73% of these procedures include removal of the ovaries, which triggers immediate surgical menopause? Yet most women are not adequately prepared to navigate this transition, often feeling completely alone. They don't realize how profoundly it will impact not just their physical health, but their sexuality, their sense of identity, and their relationship with pleasure. The medical system focuses on the surgery itself, but rarely addresses what comes after. No one talks about the grief, the hormone challenges, or most importantly, how to find your way back to yourself and your sexuality. Today, we're having that conversation. Welcome back to Pleasure in the Pause, the podcast dedicated to empowering midlife women to connect to their bodies, pleasure, and power in perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, and it is my pleasure to be here with you. I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Juliana Hauser, a nationally recognized expert in relationships, pleasure, and holistic sexuality. Dr. Juliana is a PhD in counseling education who has built an extraordinary career spanning academia, clinical leadership, and community advocacy. Her celebrated TED Talk, Agency, the Noun, Verb, Concept, and Skill, highlights the importance of having choice over our bodies, health, and relationships. She leads a thriving private practice where she works with individuals and couples navigating complex life experiences. In September, she's releasing her highly anticipated book, A New Position on Sex, a guide to greater sexual confidence, pleasure, and authenticity. What makes Dr. Juliana's perspective particularly powerful is that she brings both professional expertise and personal experience to today's topic. As a sex therapist who personally went through surgical menopause, she offers a unique dual lens that can help women navigate this often isolating journey. Today, we'll explore what surgical menopause really means, how it differs from natural menopause, the emotional and physical challenges it presents, and most importantly, how to reclaim your sexuality and find your way back to pleasure. We'll dive into Dr. Juliana's personal story, her approach to holistic sexuality, and practical strategies for women facing this transition. Let's welcome Dr. Juliana to Pleasure in the Pause. Dr. Juliana, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation with you.
I'm so grateful you're here to share both your professional wisdom and your personal experience with us. I'd love to start with your origin story. How did you come into this work of sex therapy? I love to ask that of people who are in this space. Was sexuality something that was openly discussed in your family growing up? And what were some of the narratives around sexuality that shaped your early understanding?
Yeah, so I love to say the first part is I started out as a kindergarten teacher. So to be a kindergarten teacher that has then become into the sex world, it may seem like a far leap, but it makes a lot of sense to me as I go through the journey. But when I think about how I grew up, my father was a radiologist. My mother was an ER nurse. A lot of what I learned, which wasn't a lot about sexuality, was the worst case scenarios because that is what their world was, like emergencies and the worst that could happen. So I had a whole lot of warnings that it wasn't a topic that was pleasurable. It was what are the bad things that could be if you're doing that. But counter to that was I'm so grateful that especially my mother gave me a lot of room to be a curious child. I was very different in that way. Like I ran around naked and I loved being free in that way. And I came into this world not realizing that sexuality was taboo or that the parts of us that age appropriately was something that you shouldn't talk about or shouldn't ask about. And I was quite precocious in the asking and in the wondering. And then I had a really pivotal friend, a peer, who I called my sexual Sherpa at the time. She was very knowledgeable and she was doing it. So I wasn't really sexually active at a young age, but I was very sexually interested and curious. And so I learned a lot through our conversations into what she was doing. And then when I fast forward to college, I soon realized that I really wanted to attend to people's emotional well-being. And when I went through my master's program and then my PhD, I only got one class on sexuality, and it was my favorite class. It was an elective. My professor took me aside and said, once in a blue moon, someone likes you comes along that's interested in sex and sexuality, and you really should probably focus on that. And
Mm.
that's where it began. And there still isn't tons of education out there. And if you're just a general licensed marriage and family therapist. So I did a lot of self education, and any workshops, any conferences that I could go to, I attended and asked questions. And that's how I got into the sexuality world. And then I had a hiatus for a bit. I was an actor in LA. And in that process of acting, I came across the intersection of performing, which we've talked about before, like the performative sex that was literal because I was acting, but also that it was mimicking who I was as a sexual being. I realized that I had defined who I was as a sexual self based on what other people were saying to me. So it started with my parents, then it was my boyfriend, then it was my husband. And when it came down to who am I had no idea how to answer that. And I had no idea where to start, let alone what my options were. My answers and my interactions were all based in the context of somebody else. And that really came to head with me that I had a long-term relationship. It really was the love of my life. And he died suddenly. And he was the first partner that I had that really wanted me to have agency. He asked me, what do I want? What do I need? Who am I? And was patient in the process as I figured it out. And I thought that I really had agency because of those questions he was asking me. But when he died, I realized I lost my identity once again, that it was still in the context of him and in a relationship. And I didn't love the feeling of it felt like my sexuality died or really drastically changed when he did, and I knew that that couldn't be. So I went deeper into the work of agency and who I was as a sexual person, and it absolutely changed my life.
Wow, you bring up so many interesting points in your story. This issue of who am I as a sexual being? It's something that I encourage my listeners and many of the women that I coach to ask. It's something that I asked myself. That was one of the first questions that I asked myself as I was making this transition through perimenopause into menopause, because what I knew of myself before was changing, and it was like, who am I now? And it's just
Mhm.
such an important question. We're going to get into that question as we talk more about surgical menopause. Also, you talked about agency, and it's something that I want to talk on. You have a celebrated TED Talk about agency. I'm going to have you define it in a moment. But before we dive into your personal story, because I want you to share your personal story with surgical menopause, can you help our listeners understand exactly what surgical menopause is and how it differs from a hysterectomy? I know there's a lot of confusion around these terms.
Yes. I don't love the word natural menopause, kind of like natural birth, that it makes it feel like there's one that's right and one that's wrong. So I say, like, when you go through menopause, that's body time, that your body's timing it. And you go through menopause that is medically indicated. And the difference between a hysterectomy and surgical menopause are the parts that are removed. And you can have a hysterectomy that you are only removing your uterus. And that does not put you automatically into menopause. It's obviously studies are showing now that it certainly changes. You do have a difference of your hormones. You do have a lot of people will have symptoms of menopause after having just their uterus removed, but it's not the same thing as having your ovaries removed with your uterus as well. And then there's also the option or there, for some it's an option, others it's a mandate to have your cervix removed too. So you can have your uterus, your cervix, and your ovaries and fallopian tubes removed, or a variation of those things depending on your choices and your medical options.
And the statistics are staggering. I looked into them. There are approximately 600,000 hysterectomies performed annually in the US. I've heard that it's one of the top surgeries performed after cesareans for women. And 70% of those 600,000 women age 45 to 54 are having their ovaries removed. And so many seem unprepared for what this means for their overall health, for their sexuality. Why do you think there's such a knowledge gap?
I think it begins that there's not a lot of great education in medical school about this. I just think doctors and the medical community are not prepared. Even the ones who are performing this, of course, they know how to do the surgery, but there is no training or little training, especially with the ones who are doing it now, of how to inform a woman. I also think there are some women who don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
I have this study that I've been asking women about mental health and menopause, and there's a question particularly about hysterectomies and the variations of hysterectomies, and the amount of women who do not know what parts were taken out during their hysterectomy is another staggering statistic to me. And I'm not sure if I hadn't been so proactive, I don't know where I would have fallen into that. I know to ask the questions, which I'm sure we'll get into, but I just think a lot of women don't know to ask, or it's like, I don't need to know. And there's no judgment on that. Some people just don't want to get into the science aspect of things, but I do think that you are much better equipped to help yourself if you really are an active participant in the decisions of what body parts are being taken out, and what body parts are taken out and what are left in have a huge impact on what you need for your aftercare. And that is the immediate aftercare, and it is the like in between, and then it is the year and the years after. I don't want any woman to walk into their surgical day without being completely informed as to the consequences of the decisions of each one of those body parts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so much of this decision making has to do with agency, which we'll get into because it is that decision making process. Let's talk about your personal experience because I've heard you share your story. I know you started sharing your story very vulnerably on Instagram. I was following you there. And then I've heard you speak on various podcasts about your personal experience. You went into surgical menopause really prepared, unlike these statistics, right?
Yeah.
Unlike many women. Can you walk us through your decision making process and how you educated yourself and how you got there, how you got to this place of, I need to have this procedure done?
Yes, and my caveat is for anyone listening, it's just my story, and I'm
Yeah.
not giving medical advice, and even if you hear the details of my story, you may have picked something else, and that's okay too. I just wanna share what were the facts for me and why I made the decisions that I made, and I don't wanna influence other people on how to make their choices. But for me, I walked into this with both my mother and my sister had hysterectomies at a young age, and I would kept being told, "You're a ticking time bomb, you're a ticking time bomb, you need to have this taken out. Once you don't have kids, once you don't wanna have kids anymore, you get them out. You don't need these parts anymore." And that is absolutely what the philosophy was when my mother was at the age of entering menopause. So many women in that age group in 70 and 80s, there's just a lot of hysterectomies. The numbers are even higher in that age group than the one that you're speaking of because that's what the medical viewpoint was. And it just didn't resonate with me, and I didn't have symptoms. And then I started having symptoms. And when I realized that I had a pretty large fibroid that was wreaking havoc on my hormones and was making me have my period every 2 to 3 weeks, especially when it was every 2 weeks, this is awful. And growing up in a medical family, what I heard all the time in different contexts was, if this affects your quality of life, that is the beginning of a decision to make. And it was absolutely affecting my quality of life. My hormones were all over the place. I was bleeding all the time. I don't remember how much the number landed on, but the bleeding, like I had to keep changing sheets, buying new sheets and comforters, and just awful. And I was
Mm.
exhausted all the time, and it absolutely affected my sexual life. And I felt awful. And I remember when I talked to this one physician before I was making the decision, and she looked at me and she was like, "You must be feeling terrible." I sat back and it actually made me pretty tearful. And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. You feel terrible and you still have to take your daughter to ballet and you still have to work a full day." And I really realized what is being said even more often this year, which is through the way that our culture and we as women look at our periods, that we just have to push through them and push through the pain, it really replicates itself in the perimenopause and menopause space too. That we overlook how we shouldn't have to feel this way because we are conditioned to just do that. So I knew it was affecting my quality of life. I knew there's a lot of consequences. I felt informed, but not informed enough. I haven't gone to medical school. So I really wanted to hear it, not just in a lecture format. I wanted to hear it on my own body. So I made the decision to pay out of pocket, and I interviewed three physicians near where I lived. And I did a lot of research to pick to the three, but then I went to the three. I had set questions that I wanted to have answered, and I had a vibe check that I knew that I needed to have, and I did that with any gynecologist also, but I particularly wanted this. And so I started all of the conversations with each of these doctors with, which was a version of, My sexual health matters. My orgasms and pleasure matter. And I need that to be on the forefront of everything we're deciding. This fibroid sucks, and we got to deal with that too. But I'm saying I want to have a great sexual life on the other side of this surgery, and I want to know how much you care about that.
Mm.
And I knew what I needed to hear, and I knew what I needed to feel from the doctor with that answer. And the one I ended up choosing didn't hesitate, didn't laugh, didn't hesitate, didn't minimize. And she wrote a diagram of everything and with the body parts. And she had such a detailed answer that came from experience and knowledge and prioritizing sexual health that I was like, yep, that is who I want. And to be honest, she did not have the best bedside manner of everyone there, but I knew again from my dad, you don't need a surgeon to have a great personality. You need them to be a great surgeon. So
Mm.
that's what I chose. And I say that not as a dig, but to say, I think before I would have said what I needed was someone who was kind. And what I needed was somebody who I was going to feel good about and all, because I wanted to feel safe. What I've learned through my work of agency is I can get that it's a need of mine that I don't apologize for, but I can get that need met in other ways from other people, but I cannot get a really good surgeon who knows what to do with my body that's gonna help preserve as best as can be my sexual life on the other side of that, as well as my true life. I also had a family history of ovarian cancer, so that was also playing in for me in my decision making, and I knew easily I wanted to have my fibroid and uterus taken out. I was really, really teetering on, do I take my ovaries out or not? And even until 2 days before, I was unsure if I was gonna do it. And she and I had a quick conversation the morning of, "Is this the plan still? And do you want to have these taken out still?" And it was like, "Yes." But actually, the answer was, "No, I don't." I I was pretty afraid to go into the menopause, to go
Mhm.
into it, but I also felt as supported as I could be. And the work that I'd done in agency helped me because perimenopause and menopause is the ultimate act of ambiguity. You have no idea how your body is going to be in perimenopause. It doesn't necessarily predict how it's going to be in menopause. So perimenopause doesn't always correlate with how you are in menopause. And there's no way right now for us to predict what parts of you are going to be affected. So your menopausal symptoms are different to the woman next to you and the next woman. We're all different. So we can't predict it. There's so much ambiguity. And if you're not going into menopause through surgery, then you have no idea when you're going to be going through it too. So there's so much ambiguity that there's a skill in that. To know that you're going to be okay when you can't control things or you have no control in a situation is the underlying skill I think that you have to have in order to get through something like perimenopause and menopause. And in making the minutia decisions, do you take your cervix out or not?
Mm.
That was the ovaries were the hardest emotional decision to make. Deciding about my cervix was the hardest scientific one for me to make because I knew what it meant to have your cervix removed, that it had almost more consequences on my sexual health than any of the other parts of the decision. Because I already knew I was going to do hormonal replacement therapy. So I felt like I had that taken care of in the menopause space. Turns out I didn't, but I thought I did. But I knew it was going to be a grab bag. And I remember like when I woke up, I couldn't physically do it, but I thought a lot about, I can't wait till I can have my first orgasm. So I know I can't wait until I almost couldn't feel settled until I had my first orgasm. And when I did, I cried and I was so relieved. And I was like, all right, okay, it's all right. Everything is, I didn't have
The
to.
world is still a good place.
That
Yes.
is right. Right.
So tell us, Dr. Juliana, because I don't know if many women know this, right? How a procedure like a hysterectomy or a oophorectomy, which is the surgical removal of the uterus and the ovaries and or the cervix, will affect their sexual health or their sex life. How does that happen? What happens?
How could that happen? With the cervix, really and again, I don't want to give medical advice, but this is just my education and what I know on my body and through anatomy is that one of the roles of the cervix is to help in the elongation of the vaginal canal. And it helps draw up your tissues. It helps draw it up, so in essence, to make room for a penis or a dildo or anything that's being penetrated. And for some, the cervix is a significant job. And for others, the cervix isn't that active, so there wouldn't be much of a difference if you're losing it or not. The other thing is in removing the cervix, that you have to have a cuff, like you have to have an end of the cul-de-sac. And so you could lose tissue, vaginal canal tissue, in having to sew things up and having to lose just physical length, not just the ability for it to be drawn to elongate in the arousal process. So there's two potential changes of the length of your vaginal canal and the functioning while you're aroused. That's one thing, like the nuts and bolts of it. Then there's a hormonal change. And again, that's not predictive. For some, there's thinning in the lining of your vaginal canal tissue that can make a difference of microtails or pain. There can be external pain that happens because of hormones and the changing aspect of all of your systems. There is, if you're having your ovaries taken out, your hormones are going to be shifted. And so your body is reacting to a stark difference of you had a certain amount of hormones and now you have zero. Or if you're taking hormone therapy pretty quickly, it just takes a bit for it to kick in. And then there's lubrication that makes a difference of the change in it. And that for some people, all of this is a maybe. There's no one symptom that everyone has. And even within the symptoms, there's a variation of it. So it doesn't happen to everybody. So it's not this horrible sentence to your sexual life. And I can say for me, I've had none of them. I was proactive in a lot of it. And I would say for me, testosterone has made the biggest difference in my sexual health afterwards. And I didn't go on it right away. I was so grateful I knew about this, so I wasn't so thrown. I knew it, but I didn't it's kinda like you don't think it's gonna happen to you, but I fell into the small percentage of people that I wasn't absorbing any like, through the patch wasn't working. So for
The
several
estrogen,
months
you mean the estrogen patch?
the estrogen patch and the gel that I was using for testosterone gel, I wasn't absorbing any of it. My skin just wasn't absorbing it. And at the time, I was like, when I was on the birth control patch and it must not have been working, I'm really glad that nothing happened there because I had no idea it wasn't working. And I didn't realize that my skin didn't absorb medicine through my skin until now I do. So I went longer than I hoped without having hormones because I didn't know this about myself. But once we worked around that and my hormones are at a good level, and I'm at a year mark of next week is the year of my surgery. It took about 7 to 8 months for me to feel back again and to feel back to myself
Mm,
emotionally and physically. But my sexual self came back pretty quickly. And I'm not kidding. It was 6 weeks and I was testing out how I was going to feel physically. And actually, like my first orgasm was awesome. It was actually pretty incredible, which was a relief too. But some people also like what happens is that what physically turns them on changes. So their desire it changes too, and their arousal changes. And then for some women, how they go through the excitation cycle, so how they go from pleasure to orgasm, or if they do, that can change. It can take longer, or they need other things that they didn't need before in order to get to the place of orgasm, if that's orgasm is of interest beyond just pleasure. And so there's lots of things that can happen. And
yeah.
again, it doesn't happen to everybody.
Yeah, so you mentioned the hormonal aspect, and then there's the actual physiological, the actual physical aspect of the tissues changing, the cervix, if they remove the cervix. I know that there are lots of nerve endings in the cervix that innervate
Mhm.
to the clitoris, the whole vaginal canal. I've asked doctors, are there such things as cervical orgasms? Because I know they're possible. And they're
Yes.
like, we don't know, but it
For
depends who
some
you
women,
ask.
yes.
For
Yeah.
some women, yes. So I'm glad you talked about that, but I'm curious about 2 things. So many things because so many light bulb moments from hearing your story. The sexual aspects, did you because you say women's arousal patterns change. I know women's arousal patterns change and changes even as you move through the perimenopause and
Correct.
because it is hormonal. And a lot of what I talk about here on the podcast is about exploring new pathways to awakening pleasure. It is part of the journey of moving through that hormonal shift. Did you have to do a lot of that? Find new pathways to arousal, to orgasm?
I personally didn't really. What I found was I didn't feel my pelvic floor felt a little different. Obviously, it was different. And so I almost had like twinges if I had like a thought that it was arousing to me, I would have an involuntary like twitch of my muscles that felt like a mini orgasm. And if that happened in a context of sexual connection, then it was almost like premature ejaculation. Ah, shoot, like I have to now start again for my excitation cycle and go. And so I had to learn, I had done proactive pelvic floor therapy before my surgery. And once I was able to do
Okay.
it again, able to get back into it. I love pelvic floor therapists so much. And And so it's the physical work of that. So like just understanding my PC muscles. I find it very important for women to understand their PC muscles, to see the diagrams, to understand what it looks like, and not to be unknowledgeable about or the female body in general, but specifically theirs. And it's also there's a psychological aspect of this too, that you wanna work on your neural pathways, you wanna work on understanding how your body is working together. A book that I always recommend that is really, to me, like one of the best explaining arousal system is called The Clitoral Truth. I don't know if Rebecca Chalker, but it's my favorite book, and it's the most accessible of understanding female anatomy and how female anatomy works together to conspire for pleasure. And if you understand that, then it basics of it, then whether you are a young person or you have had a C-section or you have had menopause through your body timing or through surgery, you can incorporate that knowledge into helping you problem solving whatever may have happened and changed in that process. And that makes it individual and makes it agency filled as well. And then I also want to add into this that you cannot underestimate one, the intersection of mental health and your sexual wellness. If you are feeling depressed or anxious, it can be really difficult to access your desire, and it can be hard to access your interest and feeling pleasure, and which there's a huge impact on your mental health in perimenopause and menopause in all forms. But I think particularly with surgical menopause, because there's such an abruptness to it. And so part of your sexual wellness is taking care of your mental health wellness too. And then there's
Absolutely.
a part, and this isn't gonna be the same for everybody, but I'm not the only one that felt this way, that I had to do a lot of work about what was the symbolism of being in menopause, what was the symbolism of surgery. If I'm in a yoga space, also not nearly as much now, as there was before, it's always like your womb space. Put your hand on your womb or that kind of stuff, and I was like, "What is that gonna feel like when I don't technically have one?" Or what do I do with that space? Or there's also a woo side of me that was like, what is going to happen to that energy? And what do I infuse into that? I study chakras. Like, what's going to happen? Am I not going to be creative anymore? What is the intersection of science and art in this? And I also felt psychologically and emotionally, I felt like this huge thing was happening to me. I was going to be different. And when I started my period, there is not that we had threw a party, but it was a before and after. When you have surgical menopause, there's a before and after too. There's not that when your body is timing it. But I know exactly when I went into menopause, and there felt something different with that. And I felt like the world didn't care. And I don't mean that in a self-absorbed way. I just meant like there's no ritual for us. I remember saying over and over again, I want there to be this club that I physically get to walk into that the women are like, yes. And like, come on. And there's some hard shit. That's on that floor. Here's the fun stuff. Here's the great part of it. And there's no party like that. And so I ended up hiring two people before my surgery. I hired a menopause doula, and then I hired a woman to help me do some imagery. And that's not going to be what everyone needs, but I did. And we did basically hypnotherapy where I really envisioned the ritual that wasn't actually existing, and had envisioned women welcoming me over this bridge. And I so wanted to make sure that this didn't feel like this huge loss, and that I wasn't losing this huge part of me physically and spiritually. I wanted to feel like a celebration, and I wanted it to matter. And I knew that there was so much ahead that I had no idea what to predict, that I wanted to be settled in some grounding for that. So we did that work. And then I thought I made up the term menopause doula. And then we found out there's actually a certification out there, and there's a whole bunch of people who thought of it ahead of time and beforehand. And I'm so grateful for that. And who I'm associated with is the doula school, and love the founder, love the work that they're doing. And they are trained to be an agency, which is why it worked so much for me. It was not a cookie cutter way to go through surgical menopause or to go through menopause in general. She just kept asking me, what do you need? What's going on
Mm.
with you? And I had such a short window from making the decision, like, yes, I'm going to do this, to it was scheduled. I thought I'd have 4 or 5 months. I thought it would take forever to get in. And she's like, no, 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 5 weeks and we'll be doing it. And so I had so much to logistically do with my kids and my work that I wanted somebody who kept saying, but what about you? What about you, Juliana? And my menopause doula did that a lot. And I think it made an enormous difference for how I went into my surgery and how I handled the unexpected things that happened afterwards. And for me, the most unexpected, which is it's ironic and also so cliche, I thought of everything. I bought a walker that I never needed. I bought all these things for my physical self, and I didn't do anything to take care of my mental health ahead of time.
Mm.
What a ridiculous thing as a trained therapist who was literally speaking across the country about mental health and menopause, and I didn't do it for myself, and I paid the price for it. I had a very difficult time in my mental health and forgot what I knew, which is when you have a huge loss of estrogen, especially quickly, it really affects your emotional resiliency. And so the things that worked for me before my surgery emotionally did not work the same. I was so fixated, frankly, on my sexual health and did all the things right for that. I didn't do it for my mental health. And that ultimately ended up affecting my sexual wellness too. And it's all righted now. But I feel quite passionate about saying to everybody, you should hire a therapist or a doula or a pastor, whoever it is that could attend to you and had that ahead of time. And I also wish I had taken it a lot easier on work. I took time off after the surgery for my physical self, but I wish I had taken time off in a month after the surgery and 3 months after the surgery, just days here and there so that I had mental health rejuvenation time.
Important, yeah, because it is a big procedure, and I feel as I'm listening to you speak, just because it is one of the most widely performed procedures, doesn't mean we just dismiss it like something we can just go move on with our lives after having it done, and I think it's part of the reason why a lot of women don't know what's actually happened, right?
Yeah.
Doctors perform it so often that it's just, okay, just tick, we'll just do it and you'll just move on. And women don't take time like you did to ask all the questions, to understand what are the changes that they're going to experience, and also to just take time. Probably some of the mental health issues that happen is just like this time of grieving, right? We go through this time of we're different people now
Yes.
without
Mhm.
this very significant body part that so defined our identity as females for our whole lives. And now that's not there. That has to impact you at some deep emotional, mental, and spiritual level, no matter what your religious affiliation is,
Yes.
I think.
Mhm.
And so I'm so glad that you mentioned the menopause doula and recommended getting a therapist. I think those are such great suggestions. Midlife can feel like a roller coaster. One day you're steady, the next you're unraveling. It's not just one transition, it's many. Your body is changing, your roles are shifting, the kids might be leaving home, and relationships are evolving. Your sense of purpose feels blurred. And with all of that in motion, it's easy to feel you've lost touch with yourself, with what brings you joy, lights you up, and makes you feel alive. But this isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning of something entirely new. Midlife Empowerment Coaching is a one-to-one experience that helps you reconnect with your body, your pleasure, and your purpose so you can feel clear, confident, and grounded in who you are now. I'll guide you using embodied inquiry, positive psychology, and powerful mind-body practices so you become deeply aware of what's holding you back from realizing your dreams and living your true potential. These sessions are supportive, deep, and transformative. And from day one, you'll begin to feel meaningful shifts. Together, we'll create space to rediscover your spark and design a life that actually feels good to live. Because the truth is, you're not starting over, you're starting fresh with more wisdom, freedom, and possibility than ever before. Ready to take your next step? Head to GabriellaEspinosa.com or click the link in the show notes to book your free discovery call today. Let's make this next chapter your most powerful one yet. Going back to you mentioned that you felt some of the mental health challenges that you faced were partly hormonal. You said it did take you about 7 months to get your hormones sorted out because you weren't absorbing the hormones you were taking properly. How did you determine that? How did you know that you weren't absorbing? Did you take blood tests regularly? Did you have to go back to the doctor? How can a woman who's listening right now who has just had surgical menopause and is embarking on hormone therapy, what should she do to like really make sure she has her hormone therapy regimen sorted properly?
Mhm. I'm fortunate enough that I had the privilege to be able to choose concierge medical care. And
Mhm.
that made all the difference in the world for me because I wasn't bound by insurance dictation. And like my first appointment, and I saw her before. So who I had do the surgery was different than who I had to take over my hormonal treatment because I did want good bedside manner, frankly, and I wanted to have the concierge experience. And I just made the decision to put the money towards that. So she and I were meeting ahead of time too, and we had a very good plan in place that I felt really good about. And when I wasn't feeling well, and so part of that was regular blood tests. And so I do regular blood tests, and we were tracking it before. So we had all the numbers before my surgery, we had the numbers the day of my surgery, and then we were tracking it afterwards. And again, I still had to pay for the labs, of course, but I felt really good that I knew I wasn't going to be stifled by insurance dictating how often I could meet. And I had a physician who wasn't extremely busy and that our first appointment was an hour and a half. I got to sit for an hour and a half in her office and talk about everything. The way that we went about it was that we have the overall menopause plan of let's look at your cardio, let's look at your weight, let's look at all the things. And we had the how are you feeling right now? And I didn't make sense with the medicine that I was on and the levels that I was taking that I was feeling so poorly. And I wasn't having hot flashes. I wasn't having some of the traditional symptoms. So she knew better. That didn't matter. And I intellectually knew better that not everyone gets hot flashes. But I feel like we are conditioned to push through hard. And I was still doing that. And I was minimizing how bad I was feeling. And I also felt like I didn't have a choice but to push through it. And even though she gave me the space for it, I still minimized it when I was talking with her at times. And then it got to the point, and she was looking at my numbers that she's like, "I don't think you're absorbing this." And I was like, "I don't either." And when she said that to me, when she said, "Part of why you did all of this and took all of this out was to feel much better, and you're not. Something is going on." And for me, really was, and it was shocking because I didn't go into this with a history of depression or anxiety. So it didn't feel like had a high risk factor for it. It was just unmistakable. That's where my body was experiencing it and
Mhm.
took care of it. And I had patience and I knew that it wasn't going to be instant. I had to start taking oral estrogen and it takes a while because it's filters so well through the liver. And we knew I still had 2 or 3 more months that I was going to be feeling this way before I had it built up so that I could make a difference until my numbers were going to be correct. Testosterone happened a lot quicker for me. Like it felt pretty instantly that I felt better. And that
Mhm.
was great. And I'll never forget when I went in and she's like, "Okay, how are you feeling?" I was like, "I'm happy. I'm happy." And we both cheered and like high-fived and we're like, "Yes, this is so great." And again, I know I'm lucky that I had the privilege of having money to pay for a concierge care. And honestly, every time I leave the office, I feel blessed and angry that not every woman gets this. I feel very fortunate that I
Mhm.
knew that was an option out there and that it was worth putting my budget towards that. And I would say it's a significant change in my life by having that and having her and having someone high five me because I said I'm
Mhm.
happy is what a
Mhm.
gift and what a beautiful thing to have someone care about that part of me too. And it helped me also take myself seriously and to stop minimizing and to stop pushing through, but to say, I'm not going to live like this and I don't have to. And I have
Mhm.
options. And thank goodness I live at a time where there's options. I can't
Yeah.
imagine what it was like for women when these options weren't available.
Yeah, no. I've heard so many stories from women who didn't have those options available. And as you say, yeah, we do
Yeah.
have options now. And even if you can't go down the route of concierge care, if you're listening, you still have a voice. You can still find the doctor who will perform the procedure and you can have that conversation about hormone therapy, what type of hormone therapy you will receive, and go down that route and keep asking and demanding that you get your levels checked and you get the right amount of care so that you feel like yourself again. That's a whole kind of decision-making process, the whole getting onto hormone therapy, what kind of hormone therapy, those conversations that you have with your doctor, the choices that you make. There's so many choices that you have to make when you go into surgical menopause. This all has to do with agency, which you've been referring to since the beginning of our conversation. And I just want to pause here and ask you about agency for those who are listening who haven't heard this word, because there's a whole philosophy behind the term agency. And you've done so much work around this, so much study, research, advocacy, speaking. Talk to us. What is agency and how do we embark on that path of agency for ourselves, for our bodies, for our lives, for our health, for everything?
I so appreciate that you care about it and that it's resonated so much. So thank you first for that. And the easiest way to describe agency in the way that I conceptualize it is that it is learning what your terms are. So learning what your yeses and nos are, no matter what the context is, learning your terms and then learning how to live them. So it's not, it's the process is really knowing who you are and really having a truthfulness about who you are in a grounded state. And then what do you need? What do you want? What are your yeses? What are your nos? What are your yucks? What are your yums? In an honest, authentic place personally. And then if it involves other people in your relationships or in society or with a doctor's appointment, how do you then create relationships or context or a culture that respects your agency, what you need and what you want, and is relational about it? And how do you stand up for yourself? How do you find sovereignty? How do you decide that you're worth it, that it matters? And all of it is about building self trust. All of it is about trusting your instinct and making decisions that are based in the truth of who you are, in the knowledge that you have for yourself, so that you make decisions that keep promoting self trust and are aligned with yourself. I think all of us have a lot of stories, or at least some stories of self abandonment, that we knew better. We knew ourselves better. We knew it's not what we wanted, or we knew that wasn't the answer. And we paid the consequence for that. The difference of how good it feels when you make a decision that is based in the truth of who you are, especially when it goes well, and especially when you have people that respect it and honor it. But even if that doesn't happen, that you know it was the right thing for you, popular or not, and that. And I think that has to happen in the process of perimenopause and menopause, no matter what your process is. We are constantly required to ask ourselves, what is right for me? And when I figure out what's right for me, how do I back that up? Even if it's hard to do or if my resources are limited. But both of them are hard. That sometimes it can be really hard to know what you need and what you want or what your options are within that. And other times it can be really hard to be in a culture or a society or relationship that isn't supporting what you need and what you want. How do you live it then? But when it's all working together, it's magical and life changing. And when it isn't, I think it's life saving. And it's certainly been that way for my life. And I know that how I've gone through my menopause, I'm not saying I've done it perfectly. And I'm not saying it's how other people would have done it. But for me, when my ship wasn't righted in the process, when I didn't recognize myself, which I've heard thousands of women before me say, and now I really deeply understand, like almost spiritually, what that statement meant, that I didn't recognize myself anymore. I didn't feel untethered and lost. It felt like, ooh, I got to dig in and do the work to find myself through agency, which was I had to know who I was. And then I had to sit and ask, what do I need and what do I want? And how do
Mm,
I get it?
mm.
Unapologetically.
Those are great questions, great lines of inquiry. We were talking before we started the podcast how relevant they are in this conversation around choosing whether or not to go on hormone therapy. Right now, the conversation around that is so polarized.
Yes.
And I think if we implement this idea of agency, really understanding your values, who you are, what do you need, what do you want, and who is out there in the medical environment to meet your needs, to get your needs met. You have to go out there and ask the questions just like you
Mhm.
did, ask the questions, do the research. You can get to a point where you feel good about your choices and you're not having to feel guilty. You're not having to defend yourself. You walk around as a sovereign being because you've done the work, right? You've done the
That's
work to get to the point that best serves you, the decisions that
yes,
best serve you.
that's
And
right.
it's so hard, I feel right now in this time of social media, of polarizing ideas when you're so much external noise, but we really have to tune in, right? We really have to tune in and ask those questions. Who am I? What do I want? What do I need? And go from there. That's why I love your work around agency.
Mhm.
And you have your TED Talk around agency, which I
Yes.
highly recommend if anyone wants to understand more, dive in more into this idea of what agency means and how you apply it into all aspects of your life. Because it's not only with regards to health, relationships,
Yep.
everything. Every
Yep.
decision you make in your life You have agency.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, and thank you for watching my TED Talk. What I also think is that it empowerment, like, which is a movement that our age group has really been taught is really important, which it is. But what I have found is that agency is relational. So empowerment is individual, agency is relational. And I think that difference, because empowerment is also about knowing what you want and what you need. It's part of
Mhm,
that thing. And
mhm,
it's saying to yourself and to others, it matters. What I know and what I need and what I want matters. That's a beautiful realization to have and to live. But what has happened, and we see it in the menopause space, we're seeing it now, is if you don't become relational with it, if you don't understand, it makes it so that if you're choosing not to do hormonal replacement therapy, if you're an agency, I'm like, good for you. As long as you have made it informed and purposeful, intentional decision based on the truth of who you are, I'm so glad if you're not doing that. And it makes you not have to make me wrong if I have done the same process of a purposeful, intentional, decide that it is for me. So I don't have to be threatened by you. I don't have to be oppressed, but you don't have to be oppressed by me. I don't have to make you wrong in order to feel right about my decisions. And we don't have to feel threatened that everything has to be homogeneous in order for us to be doing the right things. In fact, quote the right, I don't even like the words, but like what really is right is a culture of people being informed and having options that don't have to be copacetic in order for them to be fruitful. And if you have a culture like that, then everyone gets to have more self trust and you get to be making agency filled decisions, which when you find relationships like that, people like that, companies like that, cultures like that, the difference of quality of life is so much better. Their mental health, their sexual health, everything is better when there's more than one person's an agency. It is exponentially better when it's more than one. And I hope that we will start infusing more agency in the perimenopause and menopause conversations and individually. It's same with medical and therapists. I personally think it will make an enormous difference because we don't have to be right or wrong. We get to be individual, and that's part of who we are as humans. And I think a lot of times we forget that. And there was something else that I wanted to say too is that even though we've talked about some of the things that can go wrong and surgical menopause and all that, there's a lot that goes right. And agency is a part of that. So I would say, like, some of the things that I made, the decisions I made in agency was that, like, I threw a last period party for myself. I'm sure there's other people that have done it. It is fine with me if no one in the world does that again. It was so healing and helpful for me to do that. It was fun. I needed some levity to it, and I wanted it to matter that this was my last period. I saved some of my blood. I didn't even know what I was going to do with it. And I was like, I don't know. I'll keep it until I know. And that may be weird to some people too. That's fine. Also, like my sister couldn't think she just thinks I'm the strangest thing in the world. She had no issues with getting her hysterectomy. I have made it this whole production and that's okay too. And I also I filmed myself going up to my surgery almost every single day and compiled it into this half an hour thing of what my journey was. And I talk a lot about having my last period and also being so sick of having my period every couple of weeks and how bad I was feeling. And a couple of times I say, I really hope it's worth it. I really hope it's worth it. I hope
mhm,
that I do feel much better. And although I couldn't have said that 4 months ago, I sit here now at this past even the 7, 8 month mark that like my quality of life is so much better. My mental
mhm.
health, my sexual health, my physical self. I don't feel back to where I was. I feel better. I thought I was going to mourn a whole lot more about not having periods. And every once in a while, like I'll think to check to see, like, oh gosh, did I start? I'm like, oh wait, no, I don't start anymore. Great. And I bought new underwear that I love that I no longer have to worry about ruining it. And that's so fun and freeing. And I bought new sheets and that was great. I'm not going to ever mess those up. And my hormones aren't all over the place and I feel freer. I really do. And I've done the work for it. It did not come easily, but my work in agencies and the work that I've done in the sexual world too, because it's a complicated place to know who you are as a sexual being. And if you've done that, you know a lot about who you are. I knew I was worth it. I knew it
Mhm.
was worth not losing myself. And even during the time that I had no idea what was going to make it feel better, my previous work in different contexts, and I don't mean professional work, I meant personal development work, made the difference in me not giving up on myself and giving up on having a happy quality of life. I'm grateful for that. And it happens for other people too.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. That really knowing that you're worthy of all of the effort and time that you put into yourself. So beautiful. You mentioned this inquiry of who are you as a sexual being. We've touched on it a couple of times. You talk a lot about figuring out who you are as a sexual being as an important line of inquiry at any point in your sexual journey. This feels even more relevant after surgical menopause and the changes women experience. You talked a little bit about your process of how you bounce back sexually after your hysterectomy, which is great. I'm celebrating you. What do you recommend to women who are going through this process of rediscovery, and what advice can you give them? It is such an important question. Who am I as a sexual being? And again, especially after a procedure like surgical menopause, what steps would you recommend women take to get to an answer?
Yeah, I would say just make sure that speaking about your sexual health ahead of time isn't an afterthought. It's a very pivotal part of the conversation, your decisions. I personally am a huge advocate for menopause doulas and pelvic floor therapists to be a part of your support team and your mental health and however you want that supported. I think it has to be proactively put in place before your surgery. Know the people, especially if you have time to do that, have that team already so that everyone's looking out for you. Everyone's paying attention to how you're doing because one of the things that I also discovered is that I didn't have a great read of myself. There were people seeing things in me that I wasn't noticing and tracking myself. So it felt good to have more than one person as a data point of
Mhm.
me. And then for me, and I know, like, I know you're in the sexual world too, I knew that the connection that I've made with who I am as a sexual being and who I am in general needed to still stay the same, meaning like, there still needed to be a connection between the two. And I needed to let it separate for a bit in order to figure out how to have it to come back together again. And in the coming back together, for me, I work through the framework that I've come through that I've been doing for 20 years. I do my own work that I put out for others. I had that ready for me. And I also really embrace the idea of curiosity. And I've learned how to not be afraid of no's and learned to not be afraid of things not working or things working differently. It was a hard lesson to learn earlier in my life, but once I became not afraid of failing, whatever that word means, or things not feeling good or things not working right, and that as a data point instead of, oh, that's a failure, that's a bad thing, it made a difference in how I was discovering who I was as a sexual person. And that's what I want people to do. Allow yourself to not hold so tight to what should be or what was. And instead of comparing who you are now to who you were or to other people and how they're doing it, is really be protective of, but where am I now? And where do I want to be going? And what do I need to get from here to there? Or is it resources? Is it education? Is it asking everybody? Is it asking nobody? Is it I needed to not be doing sexual connections with anybody for a long period of time? Or do I need to start trying new things? Do I buy lots of sex toys or do I buy none? All of those things of just like, don't be afraid to ask the questions. That's the most important part. And how you answer them, even if you don't have the answer, to me isn't as important. It is in the details, but don't avoid it and don't be afraid of asking and don't be afraid of I don't knows.
Yeah, and then the just starting with that entry point, who am I as a sexual being? I love journaling. I recently found a lot of my journals that I had stored away from my own journey of
Oh, fun.
discovering who I was as who I am as a sexual being as I was navigating perimenopause and menopause. And I look back at
Mm.
at some of my journal entries, and something that came up, and I had no idea I had written this, and it was trust. I was going through all these things, but I kept saying, reminding myself, I just have to trust my body knows how to get through this, and I will find my way
Mm.
back to pleasure. I just have to trust. So that was my word. That was sort of my
Beautiful.
guiding light. And I didn't know that. I just didn't know that until I went back and read my journal entries. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's been such a guiding light for me. And if you start that inquiry, who am I as a sexual being? It may sound, I don't know, some people, it may be confronting. It could be
Yep.
confronting because you may not have
Mm.
answers yet. But
Yep.
just write anything. Just start writing. Just let the pen flow. For me, the word was trust. It
Mhm.
wasn't anything sexy or erotic or, you know, uh,
Right.
waited. It was just like trust, trust. And that's what
Mhm.
guided me through this process. So I love that word of that inquiry. Who am I as a sexual being? So powerful. You talk about sexuality. I've heard you say this at a conference that I heard you speak at, that sexuality is the final frontier of our self development. What do you mean by this? And how does someone facing surgical menopause actually welcome this as an opportunity for deeper sexual self discovery?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And thank you for pulling that quote because it is really important. And I also think for some, it's like, huh, what are you talking about? Like, how does who you are as a sexual being have anything to do with your self development? But to me, it's the ultimate place because it is one of the final places that people go. And I think it's one of the final places of ourselves that a lot of people go to, myself included, because it's so hard. It's taboo. There's lots of shame. There's lots of right and wrong. So we aren't given a lot of education, nor are we given a lot of space. There's so many rules attached to it. So if you can sift through all of that and land on who you are as a sexual being on your terms, not performative, not based on other people's rules, but on what the truth is for you, what you have to go through, what you have to ask, what you have to show up for yourself as, what you have to emotionally navigate. By the end, you've done a 360 of you. And if that seems like a stretch, let's follow your word and you just have to trust it. I've never had anyone do my work and do the view of holistic sexuality that I was like, that really didn't do a whole lot for me. Or that I didn't have any insights. It is always like in the first 5 minutes, holy shit, like I had no idea this was waiting for me. Or I have 9 pillars of holistic sexuality. They'll look at the graphic and be like, that's the one. And it's not. It's one that they thought was a quote easy, that where all the nuggets were, where all of the insights were waiting for them. And in that process of looking at yourself through these different parts of holistic sexuality, you see it through the lens and the topics are embedded within a sexual lens, but it's all an entirety of who you are because
Mhm.
it's so threaded with agency and you're asking yourself over and over again, what do I want? What do I need? What are my yeses? What are my nos? And where my work in the sexual world overlaps with who I am as a therapist is I see no matter what the topic is that I'm working with a person, a couple, or a group, that ultimately what the majority of people want are authentic connections. And you can't enjoy and really take in someone wanting you and seeing you and valuing you if you don't see that in yourself or if you are not authentically in touch with who you are. And so there's a synergistic part, which is in order to have sexual agency, you have to know who you are. But you can start in baby steps. And by learning through sexual agency who you are, you grow self trust, which you talked about, which
Mhm.
the more you trust yourself, the more you can show up authentically to these connections, the more you feel seen. If you think about like the way that people describe a soulmate, it's typically within a romantic relationship. But I know lots of people who their soulmate is a friend. And it's because when you describe what makes that relationship so rich to you, it is that they feel seen, wanted, and valued by the truth of who they are. And that person brings out the truth of them. And that can happen in the most incredible, beautiful, transcendent
Mhm.
sexual interaction or it can happen on a park bench that has nothing to do with it, and you're both admiring the flowers. And I find both to be sexual and both to be within holistic sexuality. We just weren't taught that. And
Mm.
that's what the book that I wrote that's coming out in September, it's about that. I spent a lot of years making a framework that worked for everyone in the lifespan and for every kind of person because as I said earlier, like I think that the cure to what's going on in our world right now that isn't working is learning agency. And if you can learn agency in the context of who you are sexually, then you can nail it and it'll bleed into other parts of your life too. And when you live a life of agency, you're living a truly free life that allows you to be a different kind of person with different connections.
Absolutely. So your new book coming out in September is called A New Position on Sex, A Guide to Greater Sexual Confidence, Pleasure, and Authenticity. Can you tell us what you hope readers will walk away with after reading this book? What kind of transformation are you hoping to facilitate?
Yeah, what I hope is that for the person who's listening or the woman who's listening to this podcast, that if you're at a place that you're like, yes, okay, I get what you're saying. I like the idea of self trust. I like the idea of feeling good about who I am as, or figuring out who I am as a sexual being, but I don't know where to begin. This is the place to begin. It's a framework that holds you And it guides you, but it doesn't direct you. It allows you to have so much room. The book is written in agency. And I go first in vulnerability. I share personal stories. And some of those I'm still like, oh gosh, we'll see what people think about that. I also share client stories with permission from my clients. I share exercises, I give journal prompts. And then one of the things that I'm really excited about in it is a big part of my life because I'm a therapist is storytelling and receiving stories. And I think there's just so much beauty like in writing, like you're talking about, but also sharing our snapshots of our life. After each of the 9 pillars, there's a QR code that you can then go and listen and read a whole variety of different people's stories. So it extends outside of the book and outside of my clients and myself because there's only so much diversity that can be done. And because I've put so much emphasis on diversity and inclusion in the framework, and I've tested it for 20 years that it is diverse and it works and so much diversity that I want women in perimenopause and menopause to feel like this is a tested theory that they can trust and that they can find a lot about themselves by going through.
Beautiful. And it'll be available for pre-order.
It comes out September 23rd. So
Okay.
and I can give you links and also if you go to my
We'll make
website,
sure to do
that's
the
in it.
links.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So before we say goodbye, what do you want every woman who goes through surgical menopause or who is considering surgical menopause to understand about reclaiming their pleasure post-surgery?
I want you to do your research on what decisions are you having to make about your anatomy. I want you not to be in the statistics of not knowing what body parts are being taken out and living in it. And I want you to be a co-creator of those decisions to as much as you want to be, but I want it to be at least a part of it. And then I want you to understand how those decisions are going to potentially impact what your sexual health is. And then I want you to let it go. And I want you to feel good that you prepared yourself. And now the next is just waiting to see what your body does in this change and not predict that it's going to be horrific and awful. And also be prepared if there's challenges. And if challenges do arise, I want you to feel good and grateful that we live in a time where there's lots of information at your disposal. We have a lot of products, we have a lot of treatments, we have a lot of professionals that can help with whatever it is that it's coming up. And you deserve to have a quality of life that includes whatever you want your sexual life to be. And pleasure doesn't have to be orgasm, but pleasure is a part of that. It is science based that pleasure and orgasms are good for you. You don't have to be partnered to have that. You can do that yourself. And if you are partnered, it doesn't have to be partnered in bringing it. It's all about back to what do you want? Who are you? And remembering that this matters, that your sexuality isn't a luxury, it's a necessity.
Thank you so much. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing your professional expertise and your personal journey with us, your message that women can find their way back to pleasure after surgical menopause is so important. For listeners who want to learn more about your work and your upcoming book, where can they find you?
My website, Dr. Juliana with one N.com. And then on all social media is Dr. Juliana Hauser.
Thank you so much for this incredibly valuable conversation,
Thank you.
Dr. Juliana, and can't wait to share this episode. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who might benefit from hearing that they're not alone in this journey and that pleasure and sexual confidence are absolutely possible after surgical menopause. Want to help me spread more pleasure in the world? Please subscribe, rate, and review this episode and share it with a friend. These conversations are meant to be shared, and this is how we create ripples of pleasure and connection throughout our communities. Every time you share this podcast, you're helping another woman discover her own pathway to pleasure and power. And don't forget to follow and tag me on Instagram at Gabriella Espinosa. Until next time, remember, your pleasure matters.